All right, YouTube. Brazil's lower house has annulled the attempt to impeach Dilma Rousseff. Of course, this is the leader of Brazil implicated directly in the Petrobras scandal, as well as sending an email trying to draft a former president, also implicated, onto her team, into her cabinet, to protect him from being prosecuted. The increasingly weak and dwindling Marxist and socialist elements within Brazil that elected her in the first place are trying to defend her by, well, yesterday they were talking about using the courts to try to block the verdict, try to keep her from being prosecuted, keep her from being impeached, because they want more welfare, I guess, or some bullshit like that. And nationalized oil is not a good idea. Venezuela's learning this the hard way. Now so is Brazil. Now they've just annulled it, though. They've said, oh, well, they shouldn't have been publicly discussing how they were going to vote before the vote, and blah, 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 this breach and that breach of protocol or something. None of which really matters. I mean, nobody gives a fuck. It's obvious when somebody's approval rating is hovering around 15%, it's fairly obvious that the people don't want them to stay in office. When a person gets soundly impeached, when impeachment proceeds with a large proportion of a legislature then elected by those people, including people who formally supported that figure, it's clear they've lost even the will of the legislature to continue governing. This is the case also, I will say this, for those who say, oh, well, this is just anti-socialist propaganda. If this were some real far-right, like libertarian, true free capitalism individual, and they had a 15% approval rate, and the legislature voted to proceed to impeach them, that would be something any sane person would support, because it's clear. Where are their fans? Where's their support coming from? A handful of people that they happen to have paid off, or something like that? It doesn't matter what political alignment they happen to have. Dilma Rousseff should be forced out of office. At this point, because the political system of Brazil is so obviously corrupt, so obviously cronyistic, and because Dilma Rousseff's allies within the legislature are obviously going to pull out all stops to prevent her from being properly forced from office, as is the right of the Brazilian people, the Brazilian people need to call a general strike. They need to refuse to work. They need to take to the streets. They need to block the streets. And they need to protest until she's removed from power. They need to turn up the heat on the government. Now, Brazil has practically turned protesting into a national sport anyway. Millions of people turned out to protest the first time around. That was before most of the elements of the scandal bringing her approval down low even started. Then they found out, oh, she's trying to protect her friend here by drafting him onto the cabinet. The protests grew more. And then there were millions of people celebrating when their legislature voted to proceed with impeachment this last time. Now, if there's that much dislike and disdain for Dilma Rousseff, and that much support for removing her, and if the parties that are in favor of removing her, including some, members of parties that once supported her, then I would think that the Brazilians would turn out in even more massive numbers to protest this move, which clearly violates the fundamental principles of a democratic republic. I mean, that's fairly obvious. Again, it doesn't matter. If she were like the most far-right politician, I would expect the same result, because the corruption's the same, the scandal's the same, all things other than alignment being equal. It doesn't fucking matter if the politician's embezzling millions of dollars and trying to get people off who have done the same, and has run the economy into the ground and is basically an international laughingstock, which is what Dilma Rousseff now is. And it's making Brazil increasingly turn into a laughingstock. You have to understand, for anyone within Brazil, from the outside looking in, this just makes it look like a sort of banana republic style government, wherein a person, even if they are vastly disliked, even if impeachment has actually proceeded from the legislature by a large majority, that person is still being protected by one individual who annuls the vote without further explanation, other than, oh, well, people shouldn't have talked about how they were going to vote before they voted. That makes you look like, Venezuela or something like that, or Bolivia, from the outside looking, it doesn't look like a Western-style democratic republic. It doesn't look like a representative state. It looks more like you've got a tin-horn dictator for life who simply can't be removed simply because they've got some cronies in the government. It makes Brazil ultimately look bad. It's like in the Bush era. A lot of people, myself included, wanted to get rid of Bush. We wanted to see him impeached for war crimes, for all sorts of bullshit that he did. When he failed to be impeached, increasingly, people were laughing at the United States because they said they've got this retard leader who's got like 20% of the population still in support of him, and yet he's not being removed from office. It made us look weak. It made us look stupid. Well, Brazil shouldn't go down that same road we did because we had to deal with him for years and years, even after he had lost most of his popularity. He was a lame duck for the last 2 years he was in office, post-Katrina. Dilma Rousseff is a laughingstock. She's corrupt. She should be removed by force. If the legislature of Brazil, if the courts are unwilling to act, then the people need to act. They need to essentially cripple the economy of Brazil for a few days until it really turns up the heat on these politicians. They can beat you down with the police all they want, but at the end of the day, who's paying their paychecks? The government of Brazil is. And if that government sees that it's slowly losing power, losing a grip on society at large, they will cave. They're not going to continue defending someone who has become completely indefensible and destroy their own nation in the process. Because then they run the risk of out-and-out revolution. Then they all risk getting hanged. And I think we know what generally happens when such a thing occurs. So yeah, Dilma Rousseff should go. Doesn't have the will of the people behind her, doesn't have the will of the Brazilian legislature either, and yet somehow this one idiot in their legislature is capable of annulling the entire proceedings when the vote's already been held, and now they have to vote again. It just doesn't, and they have to wait for the Senate apparently to put it back in the House or some shit what the fuck's that retardation? It just doesn't make any sense at all. Why should this one person be able to annul the vote of the entire legislature and the will of 85% of the Brazilian public? Doesn't that make you slightly mad? So hopefully the Brazilians that use protest as a national sport will take to the streets in even larger numbers and really turn up the heat on their government. If nothing else, you have a good time. You get to fucking stand out there chanting and being angry. That's something that's fun to do. I can understand why Latin Americans and Europeans do it more than Americans, though, because remember, the police here usually will turn their guns on you if you assemble at all. Rather unfortunate police state. Yeah, we should be impeaching some politicians too, admittedly. But Dilma Rousseff is less popular, I think, at this point than the U.S. Congress. That's pretty low, by the way. For anyone who doesn't know anything about the approval of the U.S. Congress, right now it's like record lows, and I think they're still more popular than Dilma is. That's pretty sad. That's about all. Peace out.